It's finally starting to warm up a little bit. It's still a little bit chilly for me. We survived those few cold nights. Actually wasn't really that cold in the end. I think we had like 30, 31, 32 degree freezes. We did have one night of 27 degrees. And a quick update about the minis from the last video. They actually almost all survived the freeze, no problem at all. There were some little one-framers that did bite the dust, but they were going to bite the dust anyways. So I've had those styrofoam minis now. Like I said, this is my first time running them this year. They have survived a heat index during this summer, during I think it was August, of 120 degrees Fahrenheit. They did just fine. They didn't swarm. They didn't abscond. They were in full-blown sun, so they can handle the high heat. And now I found they can handle at least 27 degree Fahrenheit nights here, and several consecutive just mild freeze nights as well. I think it's that styrofoam that they're in. They just seem to really be able to control their internal temperature really, really well. So I don't know how. I never would have guessed if I hadn't seen it myself, but I'm still raising queens and cells. At least as of the first week of December, there were still queens running around when I checked them yesterday. I pulled them a little early last time because I was scared of the freezes, so I didn't have any harvest this week, but there are already some that are coming up that are starting to lay. So I'll be able to pull some more queens probably here in the next couple of weeks. And that, if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have believed it myself. I think that's pretty cool that we're able to raise queens so long. I'm still seeing drones. I ran into a yard yesterday that was basically just a nuke yard, and they were producing some drone pupa on the top bars. And go figure, I never would have guessed raising queens in December is pretty awesome. Perk of being in Florida, I guess. As you can see behind me, the farmer has still not picked his cotton as of the first week of December. I got to go talk to this guy and tell him to get this stuff gone and get this dished in so I can get some mustard. But I think this guy just kind of farms on the side or something from what I've been told. So he's taking his sweet time. So I don't know if I'll get any mustard here, but I came back to this yard to refilm it because it's, number one, it's the last yard that I have to grade for California after doing my full rotation. And I just wanted to update and see what these hives are doing because I started noticing some problems in some of the other smaller, like late summer, fall yards that I've been working on for the last week. I'm running a week behind because we've had those cold days. We've had a few days of rain. So I was hoping to, my goal was to finish grading the hives by the end of November, but here it is in the first week of December, and I'm just now catching up. I've only been grading the hives that are 8 frames or and above and look extremely healthy. I've been very conservative in my grading, and it looks like we're going to have one full semi-load for almonds this year, which is fantastic. That's what I need to make my budget work for next year. So looks like Walk in the Woods apiary will be in business in 2025. Is that, yeah, that's next year. So that's good, assuming we can get them there and the contract doesn't fall through and they come back good and blah, blah. There's 1,000 things that could go wrong with California. It's always a gamble, but at least on my end, I've got the bare minimum I need. So what I'm going to start doing, probably after I finish this yard, I might do a little bit today. We'll see. What I want to start doing now going forward is grading all the colonies that are in that 6 and 7 frame population range, and that are not going to be quite ready for California. Technically, my contract allows for a 6 frame population minimum, but they want an overall 8 frame average. And if you send just a 6 and, you know, it's a little cold in California, or they get beat up a little bit during the 3-day transport over there, they can drop in the 5 or the 4 range or whatever. Then my broker is going to grade those as a 0, which will lower my average. He's going to put them in some giant staging yard with everybody else's bees that don't make grade, and they're all going to get robbed and killed out. And last year, he ripped the guts out of all my small ones and threw them into some of the medium-sized ones so they would make grade, which saved me a few colonies from being docked, but it guaranteed that the colonies that he pulled from were just dead as a doornail. Lost the comb, lost everything. So I'm trying to make sure that doesn't happen this year. And what I'm going to start doing on top of grading those, I called a friend of mine, if anybody knows Tyler Walker over in Bonifay, he runs Choctaw Bee Farm. He's a really great guy. He sends bees to almonds as well. We actually used to send bees with him and his father-in-law. I wish they were still doing it, but they're not doing the brokering side anymore, unfortunately. It's a lot of work to do it from this side of the country. I get it. But he's one of probably 2 beekeepers, commercial beekeepers around here that I trust enough to call when I have a problem, and I'll tell him what's going on in my operation. And last year, he sent a lot of hives to California. He made grade. The broker was very happy. We used the same broker, and the broker very semi-politely told me that he liked Tyler's bees better than mine last year. So to kind of figure out what Tyler was doing, I called him the other day and we're texting or whatever, and asked him what he was doing to prepare his bees for California. And we're doing basically the same thing. We're moving them in mustard, we're beating down the mites. But the only significant difference is that he's feeding his bees a true 1-to-1 syrup basically all winter long, where I've been feeding mine anywhere from a 2-to-1 to almost solid syrup. And I've run into some issues with that, and I'll explain that here in a minute. But I haven't fed my bees a true 1-to-1 syrup in years, probably not since we had a couple hundred colonies. I've always done 2-to-1 because it just gets them, keeps them alive, puts some weight on them until I can come back around and feed. I think he's feeding like every couple of weeks. I struggle to feed every 4 weeks. So I'm just going to have to pick up on that. But clearly his bees were, I'm guessing, were better than mine according to what the broker said. So, and maybe he's got better muster yards, maybe he had better queens. There could be 1,000 reasons. But the only reason that's I can really come up with is that he's giving them maybe that 1-to-1 feed. And I am running into some colonies that are being honey bound, and that would cause it. I mean, that's definitely a good reason. So for the first time in many years, and the first time since we've definitely been commercial, I'm making a true 1-to-1 syrup out of that high fructose corn syrup. And I'm going to be feeding all the colonies from here until they ship in January, hopefully February now, because I want to give them a little more time to grow up. And I'm really wanting to see if I can get these 6-frame colonies to at least be an 8-frame. If they can get even higher, then that would be ideal. But I want to see if it's possible. I really have no idea. This is a kind of uncharted territory for me. But if any hives that I can grow above this 1 semi-load I have already is just going to be icing on the cake. I mean, it's just more money. It's going to help us grow the business a lot. So it's definitely worth the time, the effort, the extra syrup. The good thing is if I'm feeding a 1-to-1 syrup, because I'm adding so much water to it, is going to extend that 2,600 gallons that I bought, I mean, by quite a lot. So I'll definitely be able to continue to keep feed on the bees through the entire month of December. I'm suspecting I'll be even able to feed them through January as well. So that's what I'm going to be doing today, just feeding and grading those 6 to 7 frame colonies so I can get a count and see is it even really worth it to have a chance to send that second semi, because that is the goal, is for me to send 800 colonies. I don't know if the business will be able to do it this year. We may need to just build up the more colonies in the spring, but ultimately I want to be able to reliably send 2 full semi loads to California every year and budget for that. And that would just put us on easy street for the rest of the year. We could really, really expand with that kind of money. So that's what I'm shooting for today. So 2 big mistakes I've already caught here recently that I started to notice are mostly in the small colonies. You know, I didn't make a ton of splits this summer and this fall because I intentionally wanted to keep the spring colonies stronger for California, but you always have to make some just to make up for the dead outs from the first part of the year. It's just how you have to keep your numbers up. But you remember I showed this yard, I think, in a few videos back when I thought we were making that goldenrod nectar. They were drawing foundation. So I came out, these were basically Nucs, and I threw on pretty much medium boxes of foundation on all of them. This yard actually did draw out many of the frames, and I've seen some other yards too that have drawn many frames out. But the problem I'm finding is now that it's colder and they've mostly got boxes of foundation on them, or primarily foundation, and in that super thick syrup, like I think the last month in November, I think I didn't even feed a 2-to-1. I think it was like even thicker. I was adding 12 to, for me, I think a 2-to-1 would be 50 gallons of water to 200 gallons of syrup. I was giving them anywhere between 12 and 25 gallons of water, which in hindsight was way too thick. I even tried feeding a yard of straight solid corn syrup. Bees can't take it. That's the problem, even when it's warm. If the colonies are really, really strong, they can. And those colonies look great if they don't get too plugged out and the brood nest gets reduced. But I don't care about those strong colonies because they were already going to California. I could have fed them any syrup ratio and they would have been fine. What I need are these small colonies, these 5, 6, 7 frames, these nuke yards basically, that are like these to grow up. And what I ran into is that not only can those small colonies not take that really thick syrup and process it, but because a lot of them basically only had a few frames downstairs, they were plugging out their brood nest. You know, sorry, bee flew in my nose. And it was just reducing them, so they couldn't expand any. And on top of it being colder, they don't want to go into this top box that is basically empty for the most part, or it was in the other yards I've looked at, to get up in that syrup. So I'm going to not only have to give a lot of these smaller colonies a 1-to-1 feed, and a lot of these buckets, although I'm kind of seeing, looks like a lot of these actually took it, which is great, but a lot of the other smaller yards like this, I've had to take all these buckets and just carry them and dump them back into my syrup tote to reblend it with all the water, or I'll just sort of take it and equalize, you know, so every bucket's got a gallon. Because a lot of these yards that got the solid syrup, even 4 weeks later, have almost 2 full gallons of syrup still on them. And maybe some of them took about a half gallon. The really strong ones took a gallon, but they're not, even though there's more calories in that syrup, I don't think it's effective because the bees aren't able to take it and process it and utilize it. I actually ran into a small colony the other day that had starved to death with 2 gallons of syrup on its head. So that was a major mistake I've made this year, I think. I don't know if me supering them, kind of over supering them early, was a good or a bad thing yet. I'm kind of on the fence about it because I did get several thousand frames of foundation drawn out, mostly medium foundation, which is great. I needed it. But I also have several thousand frames that the bees haven't touched, and many hives that have not grown because they can't get to the syrup. So what I'm doing, because I don't want to pull these boxes off and break them back down to singles and then come out, you know, a month later to resuper them, something I've never really done before is just to rotate the boxes. I used to do it in my old job sometimes. It was a pain in the butt. I never really bothered with it, but I think I'm going to try it here. So if the bees are not really have a good population in these supers, I'm just going to rotate them. And that'll put the brood box, which is probably downstairs right now, directly underneath the bucket. So even if it's cold, they can still process it. And my hope is that the bees will expand in what will be the top box now where the brood nest is. And then maybe right before California, I can come back and flip them and rotate them again. And I think that'll be better because the bees are going to want to grow up this time of year technically, but they really need to grow out before they want to go up. And I just don't know. I think that's going to be the better thing to do. So I think that was 2 big mistakes I've already made. Way too thick a syrup and probably over supering. We'll have to see how it plays out. If they've drawn enough, it'll be okay for me to have over supered them a bit. But now again, I'm just having to kind of undo everything I've done, and I feel like I lost almost an entire month of growth in these small colonies just because of the over supering and the heavy buckets that I gave them through November. It just sort of stunted them, and I feel like I wasted a month of growth. It's really frustrating, but now I'm gonna have to go back and undo a lot of this. So that's what I'll be doing as well, and hopefully I can rectify that problem that I created. Well, just got into the hives, and this gives me hope. This was an old frame, a pretty nasty plastic foundation, doesn't have any wax coating on it, and they haven't done anything to the other side, but they did draw that so far. Didn't even touch the other 4 frames because remember, a lot of these were basically 5-frame nucs I dumped in, gave them 5 frames of deep foundation, and then came back and threw a medium box of either really old medium comb after extraction. Well, I shouldn't say it was old, it was fresh comb after extraction, and some of them did get boxes of foundation, but you can see this one's, they're doing pretty good. They actually took their entire 2-gallon bucket here, and so that's a plus. They've plugged a lot of that out. They've only really got maybe 4 frames or so that they haven't touched. So I can see a lot of fresh wax here on the top bars. That was not here last time I was here a month ago. So they have continued to produce some wax. So that makes me feel better. I brought a lot of comb with me. This yard is a really good winter yard. I really need this yard to go to almonds. So I brought some of the spare comb I have with me to try and pull out this foundation. I'm gonna drop, I hope I have enough comb to give them all at least a full deep box of comb in this yard. I think I will, and that should help them expand a lot. And I don't know, that's so far so good. So this one, you can see it's got the original 5 frames there at the bottom when the nuke was made. They have 5 frames of comb. I'm assuming I gave them that comb last month. I did have a little bit. I've been slowly dispersing it through some of these nuke yards, but they've not moved over into it. I flipped them up a second ago underneath, and there were solid 5 frames on the bottom. And they've got mostly comb up here. They've grown a bit. I'd say they're at least a good 2-3 frames up top. So I'm not going to mark this one, I don't think, as a, I want to be really conservative here. I still see some foundation that's going to hold them back. So I'm not going to select this one as an 8 frame, although it maybe could if I was being a little generous. I like to round down. It makes things a little more realistic if things go sideways on me. So I'm going to select this one as I'm going to mark it as one of those 6-7 frame hives. I've changed the system a little bit. I've got all these thumbtacks. I've gone to a solid yellow for anything that's 8+ frames going to California, and then I'm using all the multicolored tacks for the 6-7 frames because there's a lot of those too. So this one's going to get a multicolored thumbtack. This one will probably make it. The brood looks healthy. I don't see any mite issues. The queen's laying fine. And of course, I'm about to hit them with another 2 gallons of a 1-to-1 syrup. So I feel pretty good, but I'm not going to get ahead of myself. I'm going to mark this one as a maybe. So here is another hive that's drawn foundation. This is a double deep. They're basically a 5 frame population down there. They do have 5 frames of probably comb from last month they haven't moved to. And then they have a 10 frame box of deep foundation up here. They have 3 frames like this. There's the 2 I pulled out. And all 3 of them look about the same. There's several frames of bees up here that have moved into the top, even though there's only about a 5 frame population in the bottom. This is definitely brand new. This was not here when I came here almost exactly 4 weeks ago. So early November. I don't know what the heck would be producing nectar this time of year. Really have no idea. So I don't know, did they draw this entirely off corn syrup? And so far what I've been noticing, at least this first pallet here and this hive here, they've taken all of their 2 gallons of syrup. Another little issue I made, and I've fixed it since, is I didn't write down the water and the syrup ratio mixture in my notes. I would just write down, hey, I fed this yard 2 gallons of syrup on today's date. But since I've been playing with the syrup ratio most of the year, I don't know if these bees got a thinner syrup, because it's crazy to me that they've taken the 2 gallons in this month, because the other yards have not. So I kind of have a suspicion that I mixed this syrup a little thinner, but I can't really be sure. So I don't know where that wax is coming from. I don't know what the syrup ratio is, but whatever happened here is good. They're definitely absolutely growing. So that makes me feel better. The other nuke yards have not looked like this, so this really makes me feel really good. I'm going to keep going forward. Hopefully the whole yard is looking like this. Here's another one. You got your good solid 5 frame nuke that was made there. I got 5 frames of deep foundation that haven't touched in the slightest. They got a box of, this is the brand new, these are these Better Bee budget frames we bought this year. Brand new frames, brand new foundation, and they have definitely drawn a little bit. Not much, not at all. This is the one I'm like, had they not been up here and drawing this stuff, this is one that I would, number one, I'm going to change these 5 frames, give them 5 frames of comb right now. And then what I would do is I would take this box, if it was untouched foundation, I'd just throw it underneath the bottom here. Technically, you should probably pull this thing off and take it back to the house, but I just have so much going on. Don't want to bring it to the house, don't want to bring it back. So I would just throw it underneath, move the brood box up top so it's underneath where I'm going to have the bucket and the bees can feed. But since I see that they're confident enough to move up here and to draw it, and they've taken at least 3/4 of their bucket, I'm going to leave them as a hive and a half with the medium on top. So, but I will change this, and that should help them grow quite a bit. But like this one, I wouldn't mark to go. This one is still not there. It is a solid 5 frames. There's not even really a single frame of bees up there. So this one we're going to have to come back, check it again in 4 weeks, see how they're doing, see if we can't boost them up. But seeing that they're producing wax, that means good queen, laying well, low mites, plenty of feed. The bees feel like they can grow and expand and invest those resources instead of storing them. They feel that they can invest it. So that's a good sign. So here's the downside to over supering. You can see there's a 2 or 3 frame cluster down there. Look at this, full of wax moth debris, roaches, hive beetles. Those frames are completely ruined, and the bees are still in there. They're alive, barely. And this box was just about 20 frames of comb. So, and maybe they went queenless. I haven't gotten into them yet, but I mean, there's nothing there. There's barely anybody up top. So if they're still alive and queen right, I'm going to clean all this out, and I'm going to take whatever. There seems to be a couple frames of bees up here. I'm going to merge them down. This is one I'm just going to break down to a single if they're alive. If they're queenless, I'm just going to stack it with another colony that can handle it. So this is the risk of over supering. So here's a double deep. You can see that's all brand new fresh wax there. You can see the wax all over the top bars. It's about a 6 frame from the bottom. Let me see here. They're very heavy. Well, I'd say more of a, yeah, I would say it's about a 6 maybe. At least a solid 5, maybe, yeah, partially 6. Down there. Make sure that's back on the clips. It is. That's important. And I can see, maybe a frame, half frame of bees up here. So, yeah, I'd maybe just call this one a 6 frame just to be safe. But you can see how they're bulging out that wax here. I can see they've got several frames of foundation all here. I'm going to change a little bit of that out. So, like, this is one. I'm running into a lot of these here. They're just sort of 6 frames. They're clearly growing. They're clearly producing wax, drawing foundation. I am changing a lot of the, there goes the lid. I am changing a lot of this foundation out, which will help them grow, but I don't really want to select too many colonies to go to California in this yard just because they're kind of on the edge, you know. If they continue to grow like they're growing here, then yeah, they're gonna make it. The yard looks really good considering, you know, they're just some late summer nukes and they're just so foundation bound. But I don't feel comfortable in like counting them. Like if my broker were to call me today, I probably am not going to count many hives from this yard, because if they stagnate or they decrease or we get some hard freezes or whatever, bad storms like we did last January, they'll drop a couple frames in population. It'll definitely happen. So if it's barely a 6 right now, you know, it's going to be a 4, you know, in January, February. That's not going to cut it. So if it was an 8 frame, I'd go ahead and mark it, because even if they drop a frame or 2 due to the cold, then, you know, technically I'm still going to hit that 6 frame minimum. And if they build up to an 8 frame, I find it a lot easier once they've hit a population level. They can kind of bounce back because they've probably got some stored honey. They've drawn out foundation. They got comb or whatever. It was probably just the cold that set them back. And as soon as it warms, those smaller colonies that shrink will tend to expand back pretty rapidly. But I'm not really feeling too comfortable counting this. You can see up there too, there's a lot of fresh wax. I've just never seen them make wax this late in the year. They didn't do it last year, but I only fed them 6 gallons last year, and I want to say this yard has now had 10 gallons of syrup, and it's all been like that 2-to-1 heavy, thick stuff. And now I'm going to try to get another 2 to 4 gallons of 1-to-1 on them and see if that makes a difference. And some of these buckets did get a thinner syrup a little bit than last time. I can see it. There were some hives that didn't touch the bucket and it's still thick. And then there's some hives, like this is taking about 3/4 of a gallon. I mean, it's taking about 3/4 of a gallon that I can feel the syrup sloshing around is a lot thinner. So there was some point into November I started to realize the syrup was getting too thick, and I didn't really make a 1-to-1. I probably jumped back to a 2-to-1 from doing the super thick syrup. And they do seem to be utilizing that just fine, the 2-to-1 ratio. But I'm going to continue doing the 1-to-1 unless I see a big difference. You know, they're not going to starve. These suckers, they're heavy as a freaking rock. So I'm going to call this yard so far, and I'm about halfway through it, as a maybe location. It's definitely not a guaranteed location, but it looks good. It's heading in the right direction. Okay, there's a few of these like this. They're barely 5 frame population. I just smoked them down. That's why the bees look like they're not there, but they just went down. There were 5 frames of comb, a 5 frame nuke basically. They had 5 frames of deep foundation they didn't touch. And I just gave them 5 new frames of comb. And they really haven't done a thing with this medium super. I can see there's a tad bit of wax there, probably from right here, but they don't seem to be utilizing it. Where I'm wrestling with is, should I just take this one, throw it underneath, put the brood box up top, and that way this super is there if I need it. Because the temperatures are a little colder, hive beetles and wax moths are not a huge fear that I have. Although obviously you saw that colony back there, they had done some damage. So that was my plan. But because this one's so weak, I mean, I'm being generous really when I call it a 5 frame population. I think the right thing to do is just to yank this super off, and I may just have to bring it back. I don't know. I think I'm going to leave these girls as a single. There are some other colonies that I can rotate at. They're a little stronger, But I don't know. I think the right thing to do is just to tear these ones down. If they haven't even touched it, there are some hives you saw, they were just making a little patch of wax. Those I've been a little generous in leaving. But if there's nothing here but foundation, and they haven't even moved into, I like to super them when they're 80% full, so 8 out of 10 frames. And they're 4 or 5 frames. Yeah, the right thing to do. I'm only wrestling with it because I don't want to have to bring this stinking thing back next month, and there's going to be a lot of hives like this that I have to remove and bring back. But it's the right thing to do by the bees, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this super off. We're going to leave these girls as a single, give them a 2-gallon of 1-to-1 syrup, and see if we can't boost them up. And then I'll bring this box back with me in 4 weeks when I come to check these colonies, and maybe they'll be ready for it. All right, this yard's done. Like you saw, there are hives that are still growing. They're still drawing foundation. They're not ready for California yet. That's not going to happen. I'm hoping this 1-to-1 feed will perk them up. Definitely, it was weird. Like half of the yard still had probably 1 to 1.5 gallons of almost solid corn syrup. I'm assuming from the last feeding. I think what I did last time I was here is that I probably consolidated a lot of the thick syrup into the stronger colonies, assuming that they could take it. And I gave the smaller colonies a thin syrup. That's why the first half of the yard I did. If I start tearing up, it's because I just got stung in the nose. I was trying to film this with my veil off. You think I would have learned my lesson from this morning. She went right in there and got me. And, oh, man. There's nothing like, no way to clear your sinuses like getting stung directly up there. Anyways, I don't know what I was trying to say. The yard's done. I gave all these hives a 1-to-1. You can see they're still growing. They're clearly drawing foundation. It's been a month since I was here, so they've done all that since November and December. But they're not ready for California yet. They're just not. I pulled all of the deep foundation from the bottom box and gave them solid, good comb. That's going to help. And I'm hoping this 1-to-1 will do something. I just don't have much experience using a 1-to-1 syrup. I'll tell you, if I had not mixed that syrup myself, I would have assumed somebody had played a prank on me and had just given me a syrup tote full of nothing but water, because this stuff was so thin, I couldn't even feel the sugar granules in it, which is probably what it's supposed to be. But I was like, did I add too much water? I don't know. But I'm pretty sure I did my math right. And oh man, that really is killing me. Anyways, they're not ready. I'm trying to get them up there. Some of them I did break down to singles that were very, very small, and some of them I just flipped the brood boxes. Those are mostly 1/2, so the deep's on top, the medium's on bottom. So they're right under that syrup bucket. It's a good 70-degree day now. It's starting to get dark, but I mean, I was sweating today, so we really jumped back up in temperature. The bees are flying like crazy. They're drinking the syrup. So I don't think that extra water is going to hurt them too much. It's supposed to rain the next few days, but it's supposed to stay relatively warm after that. At least I think in the 60s. If I'm really hoping we'll keep staying back in the 70-degree range and they can really process it. So my plan is to come back to this yard in a couple of weeks. I'm hoping. I may just reroute my schedule just to see and to try to refill these buckets. I don't know how fast they're going to take it. I know when I'm doing a 2-to-1, the bees will normally drink about a gallon a week. So I would certainly assume, they'll take 2 gallons of 1-to-1 in 2 weeks. I'm not really sure. This is kind of a new thing for me to try. Okay, so what seems to have happened is this first half of the yard here was completely, their growth was stunted. They weren't really drawing too much more foundation. And this half of the yard had taken all 2 gallons of their syrup and had grown. I started here this morning. That's the ones I was showing you guys where they had drawn even the deep frames of foundation. And these mostly still had buckets of almost completely thick syrup. I mean, probably a gallon to a gallon and a half, gallon 3/4 were left. So what I think I did last time I was here, I remember this first half of the yard was the stronger half. So I probably took a lot of the heavy syrup that was from the weaker half of the yard and consolidated it along these buckets. And I'm sure I topped them off with a thin feed. That's what I've been doing lately, since I've kind of seen that the thicker syrup has been causing some issues. And so these got almost a pure thin syrup. It wasn't a 1-to-1 because I only just started feeding 1-to-1, but it wasn't anywhere near too solid. So it's pretty clear that these colonies had a thinner syrup, took it, utilized it. They've drawn that foundation like you guys saw. They're still not ready for California, but they're heading in the right direction. This half of the yard that had the solid syrup still had those full buckets. They were nowhere near starving to death or anything. They had their food, but they were not expanding at all. They weren't really drawing foundation. They were just sort of sitting there, and they were still with that little 5-frame nuke that I moved over here, or some of them had even dropped a frame. And they were not in those top boxes anymore. They had just kind of gone back down into their brood box. So that's probably the answer I'm looking for about the thin syrup. It may not, you know, my argument is, oh, it's more calories and it keeps them going. And a 2-to-1 syrup is definitely better for my schedule, period. Definitely the first 2 or 3 buckets I give them out of the year, for me, needs to be 2-to-1, because it adds that weight after I pull honey. And since I make honey on singles, I've got to get a lot of calories on them, get them fast. And there's so much happening in the summertime, and the bees are burning so many calories because it's so hot here, that for me, a 2-to-1 is hands down the correct answer. What happens, though, is after the first 4 to 6 gallons of that 2-to-1 syrup, they're mostly pretty darn heavy. And in those late season splits I'm making in the summer and the fall, they just won't take it. So there is a point where I do need to convert over. I don't know if the 1-to-1 is the correct ratio or not, but definitely adding at least a thinner syrup later in the season is probably best to keep them in a state of growth. And doubly for sure, these little late season splits just need that thin syrup because they can't take and process that heavy syrup. I definitely am not happy with going any thicker than a 2-to-1 ratio. I've seen some guys online saying they'll feed their bees almost a solid syrup, but I just don't know how they could do it unless they're just a massively strong hive. And that's all you're trying to do is just to keep food on them. If you're trying to grow them for almonds, they definitely have to have a little more water in it. And since we're so warm here in Florida, I feel pretty confident they can handle all that extra moisture. I mean, it was 70 degrees today, so I think they can take it and evaporate it, and they'll be just fine with it. So I hope that's going to work out okay. So I don't know. I'm going to run around and feed some more yards since that 1-to-1 syrup pumps so freaking fast. I can probably just keep feeding all the way until it gets dark. That is something I really do like. So we'll have to see. I'm going to go try to thin down a couple more yards. I'm not going to have time to open them, but I'll at least fill their buckets up. That'll thin down that thick, heavy syrup that is probably still sitting on them from last month. And we can kind of start seeing the results. I have no idea what this 1-to-1 is going to do this time of year. Not a clue. So I'm going to learn, and I'll show you guys when I have a result on it. I'm really curious if we can take these colonies that are essentially 5, 6, 7 frame nukes with a box of foundation on them. Can I just feed the crap out of them with a 1-to-1 syrup and grow them and draw those frames out and get them to almonds? That's what I'm looking to do here. That's the test here. But I'm not just testing this yard. I'm doing all the yards like that from now on. So hopefully I can see a trend, and hopefully we'll have an answer, because really, really want these girls to go to California and make me a little money. I've worked really hard. They've had a lot of syrup, and it's time for them to give back a little bit. Okay, well, I'm going to get out of here. I got to go feed a couple more yards. I need to blow my nose, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Thanks. Bye.